and one day you're a vice president of medical affairs. How did you go from being in an anesthesia practice to a VPMA?
The vice president of medical affairs had been promoted to chief clinical officer. Um, and at the time he came to me, he's like, "Hey, I'm being promoted. I really need to backfill my job because he's actually doing kind of 3 jobs at the time, and he was very overwhelmed. And he's like, "I would love for you to apply." And I'm like, "Chris, your job sucks. I don't want your job." Because I had seen the challenges and I'd worked with him on problems, right? Like I'd brought problems to him and said, "Hey, how do I do this?" And so he's like, "No, it's a great job. It's a great learning opportunity."
Watch out. You might get what you're after. Cool ladies. Strange but not a stranger. I'm an orphan.
Hello, and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the hottest and most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership today. Today's guest, Dr. Cesar Gonzalez, is going to share a few crucial real-world things with you in just a moment, including the one area we have never discussed before on this show. And it is something you must hear about if you want to become a Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Gonzalez grew up in Southeast Michigan, and after his undergraduate time away from the area, he returned to earn his medical degree at the University of Michigan and stayed on there to train in anesthesiology. Now, if you've been counting for reasons that are entirely unexplainable, we've had more physician leaders on this show from than from any other school, including Ohio State. And despite the fact that I am an alum from both institutions and that my heart is in Ohio, I feel like the Big Blue is the Big Ten champ when it comes to physician leadership. Dr. Gonzalez has also earned a Master's of Healthcare Management at Harvard's Chan School of Public Health, and most recently made his mark as Chief Medical Officer at Centra Health in Lynchburg, Virginia, where he oversaw a medical staff of more than 1,200 at 4 different hospitals, including a Level 2 trauma center, a primary stroke center, and a freestanding ED. Caesar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. We have some interesting information we're going to cover today. And in order to get to that crucial part of the show, let's go back a bit in your leadership progression, okay? You hinted to me that when we spoke earlier that your interest in leadership began in part with your experience in practice. You practiced as an anesthesiologist for many years and observed that your group of partners was only marginally bonded and that each partner was more like an independent practitioner, not seeking a lot of camaraderie. How did all of that experience influence your initial approach to your own leadership development?
You know, I got into leadership, um, partly because of that, but really mostly because they needed someone, and I wanted to make it work, and so I stepped up to do it. Not I wasn't really interested in doing it, um, but yes, when I did work on forming that group after my group had collapsed, um, I thought a lot about how we can make the team a more cohesive team. And they were all great doctors in my group. They were just not really friends outside of work. And it was very different from coming from the University of Michigan because in residency, we were pretty cohesive and not just the residents, but also the fellows, the attendings. And it honestly, that was a big draw for me in anesthesia. What drew me to the specialty was the cohesion that I saw when I was a med student. I was like, these are my people. This is my group, and I really enjoyed the time. So forming that group really worked on creating situations where we could come together. So uh, working underneath one of my mentors created a morning safety huddle. And from the beginning, I made sure that we all came together in the mornings and just discussed any concerns we had, any tough cases that we had to be on the lookout for each other. I think another thing that helped was the fact that we created a care team model. So when you have nurse anesthetists in the team, you have more hands on deck. And when there's an emergency, which I saw in my practice prior and after this transition, when you have more hands on deck that are experts that can help, it makes all the difference in the world. And it's a lot less stressful, and you don't feel like you're just in it alone solo, which which you in many cases are.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Let me interrupt for a
Sure.
second. You know, the idea that we enter medical school and we feel a similarity with a lot of the students. Of course, everybody's the top graduate of their high school and their college, and for the first time in your life, you suddenly feel very inadequate, and everybody else is so much smarter suddenly. But then you find your tribe within that tribe, right? And in your case, it was anesthesia. And yet, it doesn't always work out that, like you said, everybody is friends, or that camaraderie is not exactly what you might envision. And you then have to develop some of the parameters by which everybody's in that sandbox getting things done. So I'm hearing that that was not an intentional event in your life, but the law of unintended consequences helped you begin to think about structural alignment to bring everybody focused on the purpose of why we're a group or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that from there, it was just a matter of, okay, how do we find cohesion at work, and how do we find cohesion outside of work? And we started having gatherings. Of course, we did a lot of interview dinners because we were recruiting pretty heavily. So we had a lot of people come and interview, and then the people that were there would come and support and vet out these individuals.
Sure, sure. Breaking bread, having dinner, hanging out, it's such a simple way of growing those relationships. And I think that we probably don't do enough of that once we leave our training and we're out there, in the so called real world. So, well done. Are there any other experiences in that practice model that began to push you more towards those leadership spots in your life that we'll get into in a moment?
I think it was mostly, as an anesthesiologist, you often don't get much appreciation. Your patients are asleep. They don't remember you. You've given them a midazolam, and they don't really recall you later on typically, unless they're obstetrics. Anyone that you give an epidural to, they'll remember you forever. Anyone else, they forget you quickly. So because of that, uh, suddenly working on putting this team together, ensuring that we were safe, ensuring that we continue to provide care that was necessary. There was a lot of appreciation that was shared, and that appreciation can be very intoxicating. Like, as someone who didn't get a lot of appreciation in their career, suddenly the surgeons are very grateful, the nurses are very grateful and happy, the patients, the administrators, and so it just felt great. It felt great to feel like you mattered and that you did something that people really cared about and were grateful for. So I think that kind of drove me to continue and doing really hard projects that were extremely challenging, but also that kept bringing the team together to provide better and better care against sometimes some pretty big obstacles.
Yeah, yeah,
It was
yeah.
just it was just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
We undervalue as we progress through our medical training um, the nature of allowing people to feel appreciated. And I don't necessarily mean between you and me and you and your partners, but we work with nurses, we work with technicians, we work with folks in radiology. There's so many things that we do. And it matters so much when we say, "Hey, thank you. You did a great job today in the OR," or when you helped set up that fluoro with me and we got that right where we wanted to. God, I really appreciate you. It carries so much water for people. I just don't think we get enough of that in our training to remember the people outside, the white coat, if you will. Any experiences resonate like that with you?
For sure. And I think the key point to the appreciation is it has to be specific and it has to be genuine. Because often, we're like, "Oh, great job," "Thank you." But they're like, "For what? What do you mean great job?"
Yeah,
But when
yeah.
you can tell someone, like you said, like, "Thank you so much for taking care of that patient, and how that was really hard, and this so and so happened. Thank you so much. That was really great." They were appreciative. Their family members commented on your care. Um, that really makes people feel something that they often don't get at home or at work.
Hmm,
And so
hmm.
if they see that they're making a difference and that people are noticing that, um, it changes everything. And
Yeah.
you will go to a job that pays less, that has harder hours, that all those things you will gladly sacrifice if you feel like you are making a difference and having an impact in someone's life, and are appreciated for it. So it's
I 100% agree with you, and thank you for sharing that with the audience. That's a great leadership and life lesson. So let's go forward into your career. You were in this practice. You were kind of learning on the job some things that needed to get done to make the practice go in the direction that you and others saw it. And one day you're a vice president of medical affairs. How did you go from being in an anesthesia practice to a VPMA, and then ultimately land the chief medical officer role? Tell us about those transitions.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit more background to do that. So I started out as the medical director of the Virginia Baptist Hospital, and then a few months later, the organization hired a medical director over the enterprise, and I worked with her to kind of take over the rest of the groups in in the healthcare system because there's four hospitals. I just kind of expanded anesthesia coverage, and she was fantastic. Her name's Danny Madrill, and she ended up being promoted to chief medical officer of the medical group. And at that time, I was promoted. I'd become associate medical director of the enterprise, and then I became medical director. Um, and shortly thereafter, the vice president of medical affairs, the former vice president, had been promoted to chief medical or to chief clinical officer. Um, and at the time, he came to me. He's like, "Hey, I'm being promoted. I really need to backfill my job because I'm doing." He's actually doing kind of three jobs at the time, and he was very overwhelmed. And he's like, "I would love for you to apply." And I'm like, "Chris, your job sucks. I don't want to do your job." Because I had seen the challenges and I'd worked with him on problems, right? Like I'd brought problems to him and said, "Hey, how do I do this?" And so he's like, "No, it's a great job. It's a great learning opportunity." And so I talked to the medical director who had been promoted to medical group chief medical officer. I talked to Danny, and I was like, "Danny, what do you think?" And she's like, "You should apply an interview because she had just finished her Harvard master's, and she's like, Harvard always says interview, interview, interview. Just take the opportunity." I was like, "Yeah, but what if they offer me the job and I really don't want it? What do I do then?" And she's like, "Oh, you'll just figure it out when that happens." So, so I did
Only
interview.
in our profession, after we've trained so darn hard to be a good clinician, do people go, "Hey, I'm moving up, so you should apply. And if it sucks, it'll work out," you know?
Exactly, exactly. So then I did. I applied, and in my process, I talked to everyone I could that had been a former VPMA at that institution. So there were many of them. And they were really helpful, talking about what the role was. And one in particular, Matt Johnson, he was just a fantastic guy. This is the crazy thing. People will go out of their way to help you, and you're like, why? Why would you do this? Like Matt was the kind of guy, I never met him in person prior to this, but people were like, reach out to Matt. So I called Matt and said, "Hey, so and so told me to reach out to you. I would love to hear your thoughts." And he was like, "Absolutely. And I will do a mock interview with you and help you with the interview process." And he spent like an hour doing a mock interview, giving me feedback, helping me with it. Um, and and it was just, I don't even know him. Like he just decided that he would be helpful, and it was just tremendous. And so I've tried to also do that for other people. But I went in there, did the interview, and like I mean, you would have to ask the people who interviewed me, but they did offer me the job. I felt like I nailed it because I had prepared so well. Um, and then I was offered the job, and I was like calling Danny back up. I'm like, "Danny, what do I do now? They're offering me
Right.
the job. I'm not sure I want it still." And so I chose to do it, and I never looked back.
And then from there, you eventually landed in the chief medical officer role. Was it the same process where the person in front of you stepped away to a different role and you came into that?
It was actually a new role. So the VPMA role there it's kind of weird. It was kind of like the chief medical officer role. It was system wide. It was overall for hospitals. It was over medical staff and not a lot else. So, I did pick up infection
That's
prevention.
enough, dude. Dude, running different medical staffs and all of the quality credentialing privileges and MEC, that is an overwhelming responsibility for one person.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, but also you're like, after a while, you want to learn something new, right? So I did get infection prevention, which was super fun to work on, directly. And then indirectly, I worked with quality and safety, of course, because you're a big part of that, no matter whether you're over them or not. It's really irrelevant.
Right.
You kind of run that show, so to speak. But then what ended up happening was there was a restructuring where we created a service line model. And I say we more broadly. I didn't do it, of myself, but the service line model was created over every basically division pretty much, and it was really nascent. It was undeveloped, and there was a hospitalist who was the service line medical director over acute care service line, and he was retiring, and so a gap. The chief clinical officer, who was my boss, and the chief physician executive came to me and said, we would like you to take on this responsibility. And he, at the time, I think it was a point 0.5 FTE. And then there was also an associate VPMA who was moving into the CMO role at the medical group. And so there was like another point 0.2 FTE. So it's like 1.7 FTE total. And I'm like, that's a lot of work. I would love to do it. Can I have some help?
Yeah.
And and so they kind of restructured. We got rid of the VPMA title. We created a CMO title and an ACMO title. And so I hired an ACMO, and took on a lot of the service line work, ended up eventually over all of, the surgical, perioperative care and acute care, ED, ICU, hospitalist, pulmonary, those subspecialties, et cetera. And that's how I kind of got that job. I didn't interview for it. It wasn't there before, it was kind of formed. And then I oversaw the medical staff through the ACMO who did kind of the VPMA traditional work.
Right, right. We're kindred spirits. It was very similar to how my role evolved, and I too started as a VPMA, and then this sort of idea of structuring the right approach to managing more than just the medical staff, meaning quality, safety, and different parameters within the hospital. And I see that happening a lot. And you and I are both fortunate that we would have had an administrative team that understood we can grow and we can grab that scope. I'm 1.7 or 2.2. I don't know that I want twice the work, but that there is responsibilities that we can have and help the VPMA or associate chief medical officer, and everybody is better for that. So it sounds like that worked out very nicely for you.
Yeah, yeah, it worked out well, and it was a lot of fun doing more broad work and developing service lines, bringing the teams together, creating KPIs and really joint purpose. Because the Q care was they were pretty scattered at the time, and they didn't really have although they had a new structure, it wasn't really functioning super well yet. And the work that the gentleman had done before me, I kind of took that and kept going with it, which is exactly what he wanted to do anyway, was continue to develop. But so getting the ED to work with the ICU, to work with the hospitalist in a more cohesive manner, and having kind of shared goals and metrics, it was really inspiring to see what they did with that, and they
Yeah.
did a lot of great work with that.
And you have helped prove a hypothesis of mine that physicians are very capable of taking on these roles, the scope. We're not so smart about recognizing it's very large, and we need to get those resources. And Rick Sheff from the Greeley used to teach in his VPMA seminar: as you grow in the role, make sure that you ask for the appropriate resources. Everybody else around you, the CFO does it. The head of HR does it. Everybody does it, but the physicians don't think, because we just keep doing more, which is our training. Um, so one of the things you shared with me when we spoke before was, as you're progressing and as you're help facilitating this, aside from these really amazing mentors and guides that you found, that you've mentioned, there wasn't a lot of material. There wasn't a lot of books or or dedicated courses to growing into these roles. So how did you begin to shape your thinking in the absence of that material? Say, how do I become the leader in this role that I want? And how did you begin to form a more directional and intentional path for yourself?
I think that was really hard because everyone that I talked to that was a VPMA, CMO, et cetera, they were like, "Oh, you'll figure it out." You know, the VPMA job is what you make of it. That's what everybody said. It's what you make of it. I'm like, what does that mean? Like that doesn't give me anything. Is there a book? Well, there's these, primers on med staff, et cetera, that are like, 40 pages long. So those were somewhat helpful. But then, like I said, Danny ended up going to Harvard and getting her master's in healthcare management. And she really encouraged me to do that. And so the healthcare system, also encouraged me to get a master's degree. So I chose that one and they supported me, paid for it. So that was a big help. Another huge help was running into John Burroughs' book, Redesign the Med Staff Model. Amazing, fantastic book. Like I wish I had it handy here. It's all marked up. It's got tabs everywhere. Um, and it really helped me understand the relationship between the board of directors, the medical staff, and everyone in between. Where does management go? CEO. Where does med staff go? And what are the responsibilities? And take that and say, okay, so I have this book, one book. I'm doing this master's program, which is super helpful for everything else. And then maybe I could bring in some experts. So I actually called John up, got a hold of him through the email, et cetera. And I got him out to train me as well as all the medical staff leaders.
Yeah.
So all those things I think helped bring me up to where I needed to be. But I also often reached out to other VPMAs and CMOs. As you know, everybody's job is different, so that makes it difficult, but also helpful because they face a lot of the similar things. And I had always been like, man, I wish there were a podcast
I
that,
did not pay Caesar to say that, everybody.
you know, I, I almost started one myself because we just needed one so badly. So I'm grateful for the podcast that you created. And honestly, the people you've had on here, the conversations have been phenomenal, really phenomenal. So I highly recommend it. Anyone check out the other podcasts. They're really, really good.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. You just inspired me to put John Burroughs' work on our website. So, one of the things that has come out of this podcast is developing a website specifically dedicated to chief medical officers, where people can identify jobs that are available, resources, whether they're books or conferences. And I've met John. John is a fabulous teacher, as you point out, and I think it's time we put his reference material on the website so people have one place to go and begin to source out what they need. And we're growing a community, and you're part of it. And you reached out to me, and for which I'm very appreciative. That there are thousands of downloads of the podcast. The bulk of them are in hospital and healthcare because I get the analytics of it. And we're growing a community of like-minded people who want to grow into physician leadership. So thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about your personal mission and vision relative to leadership, specifically physician leadership. You've spent a lot of time sharing with me your fascination with leadership, where you hope to go in your career. What is it that is your personal vision going forward?
I believe, like I think many of us, that the best healthcare systems have strong physician leadership. I think it's kind of a just a truth that you know it, you hear it, it's true, and then you see it. Like you see it in Cleveland Clinic, you see it at the Mayo Clinic, you see it at the top institutions that are performing the best and having the best quality. You have strong physician leadership, and so as you know, we weren't trained to be leaders in that sense in the healthcare field. We're trained to be clinical leaders, and so my mission has been, since I came to the VPMA role, back several years ago, to focus on developing other leaders, physician leaders, APP leaders. So in addition to the the medical staff training that I created and continues, I also created jointly with the chief academic officer here. Um, we created a clinician leadership program, and it had some APPs, some physicians, and brought them together and taught them a lot of the things that we had learned, like about having crucial conversations, about running a quality improvement project, about finance, about all these different things. Knowing yourself as a leader, like the disc profiles that a lot of institutions have you do. We have everybody do a disc profile, and so they know what their kind of fallback skills are in leadership and where they may need to stretch and move and be a little bit more flexible at times, depending on who they're working with, and also appreciate other people's leadership styles because their different leadership styles have different strengths. So I think for me, development of other leaders is my passion. I, I think it's the future. And I also, part of it was self preservation because I got into these roles and I quickly realized I can't have every crucial conversation. I can't fix everything myself. There's too many. We had 1,200 medical staff. I mean, like, I can't be everywhere. But if, the surgical department chairs of the world and the hospice chairs of the world can deal with issues and then bring me in as necessary, and I could train them to do that and help them support them, then there's like that many more strong physician leaders out there that are helping. And there's nothing more powerful, I think, than a peer, speaking to another peer and saying, hey, yeah, this frustration you have, it's legitimate. This is
Mhm,
a problem,
mhm.
but that's not how we fix it. We can't talk to people that way. This is how we should do it. That's a lot better than having the vice principal come to the vice principal's office and they're talking to me about it. And
Right.
it's a lot more effective. So I think creating leaders, creating structure around what leaders do, creating training for those leaders, that is going to continue to help us progress and deliver better patient experience, better quality and safety, and ultimately better engagement with the rest of the medical staff.
Yeah, this is we're playing catch up, unfortunately, and we can get into the structural reasons in our medical education why that is. But there was a recent post in Becker's relative to many systems are coming into the awareness that you and I have that there is a gap in the physician leadership development process. And systems, as you describe and as you've led, and I've done it as well, create a small leadership factory or an army of future leaders, physician leaders specifically, and all of the other folks, your nurse practitioners and your physician assistants. They all benefit from the leadership because no one person can do it all. And I think that you make a good point about so you may not have had this experience as an anesthesiologist because, as you describe, you're sort of underappreciated, but people would come to me and say, I need a good cardiologist. Who would you go to? I need a gastroenterologist. Who would you go to? And if you think about it, I didn't have access to their credentialing. This is before I was in leadership, right? I didn't know their quality scores. I didn't know their endo time, their withdrawal time looking for polyps. I have no idea, but I knew a good doctor when I saw one, right? And I could identify you need to go see Dr. Jones or Dr. Smith. And when you mention the Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic, many people I know that are physicians choose to get their medical care at one of those physician led institutions because they know what they're going to receive. And it's some kind of intuition or just that we can recognize good physician leaders. And I really like your approach to, a leader makes another leader who makes another leader, and that really elevates everybody onto the right playing field to do the right thing. So now we're going to get to the single most crucial part of this conversation, and in addition to all of the wonderful things you're sharing, one of the most important reasons that I wanted you on the show. When we spoke, you did describe that your organization went through a change, a restructuring, and it left you looking in a different direction for your next move. As we talk about growing into a medical director role, VPMA role, CMO role, we tend to think it's going to continue and it'll be longitudinal until it doesn't. So in all of your research and all of your development, did anybody tell you you better have a contingency plan if things don't go the way you want them to?
I don't remember anyone telling me that specifically, but I kind of knew it, right? Like, and I had some friends that talked a little bit about that too. For instance, when I moved up to the VPMA role, I had, a close friend, in the anesthesia department that was like, "Hey, why are you doing this? Like, I don't think you should do this.
Do what?
Move up into the VPMA role."
Uh-huh.
Because he was talking about all the turnover we had. So to back up a little bit, and I've been in this institution for 14 years, 7 as an anesthesiologist in the private group, 7 as a leader. And in the 7 years that I've been here, there has been 6 CEOs. And so that's a lot of turnover at the top. That being said, when I moved out to VPMA, he was like, look, I know um, this is interesting to be a VP, et cetera, but look at how much turnover there is. Is that really what you want to do? And I was like, I think it is what I want to do because I can have this impact, et cetera. And so, he talked about it a little bit, hinted at it, but also my wife and I looked at it and she was very nervous. And she's like, I'm not sure we want to go down this road. We got to the point where we decided, yes, we would take that chance. We could always go back to anesthesia. I continue to practice anesthesia, but I feel like that alone is not my job anymore. Like I do anesthesia, I still do it. I still find it very, very important to keep boots on the ground, to keep me grounded, to help me understand the struggles of the physicians because I'm struggling through the EMR like they are. But that alone, I could just see myself doing that and then seeing the problems that I can't do anything about and being extremely frustrated. I couldn't see going back that direction. And so it was, if that's the case, and this is the only game in town, that means moving. And so we kind of knew it when I stepped into the VPMA role, if I continued on that path. And once I became CMO and did my master's, it's kind of like, what do they call it in business? Uh, Sunk costs. It's hard to think about as a sunk cost. It's more like let's continue, right?
Right, right, right.
so so that's where we got to, and then we decided after talking about it after this most recent restructuring, where literally the entire senior team was wiped out off the board, and a completely new team was formed. That we would look for another opportunity to continue kind of down this pathway.
So let's dive into this a little bit for our listeners because I think this is you're my brain is firing a little bit as I think about this in real time with you, right? So as physicians, we go through the training process and we learn to be real good subject matter experts and to take no chances, do no harm. You do it again and again and again so that your mistakes go down and down and down until you're, ready to be licensed as a physician. You're ready to go out there and do these things. And we become risk averse. I mean, we may have had risky behaviors like everybody as teenagers and so on, riding the dirt bike, if you will. But at some point, we become risk averse because we're caring for other human beings. And that's appropriate. And that's an expectation of our profession. But when you get into a leadership role, and there are a lot of gray areas, there's a lot of ambiguity. I mean, I'm not talking about credentialing. I'm talking about quality, safety, harm at a structural level. We have to become a little bit more open minded about risk taking. And the physician colleague of yours that says, you sure you want to step away from the comfort zone of being an expert in anesthesia because God only knows what's going to happen to you over here, right? And at the time, and you have to talk to your wife, and you have to talk to yourself, and you have to look in the mirror. Does this ring true as your mind is trying to do that hula hooping?
For sure, and I think it didn't seem like a big risk at the time because I was like, I could always go back to anesthesia, right?
Right.
And so it wasn't a big deal. I think as a physician, the only time when your job is on the line is either if you have a quality, performance problem or if you have a behavioral problem. And not a lot of physicians have that. I think the ones that do give everybody else a bad rap
Right.
You hear about it a lot, but not a lot do that. And I know I didn't have that. So, so not having that problem was like, oh, it'd be easy for me to go backwards until, until I went so far forwards that going backwards didn't make sense anymore.
Right.
And it,
Right. And that is that leap of faith. And it's not obvious to us when we start down that road that there is a point where going backwards may or may not happen. But then fast forward. So you've successfully navigated uncharted territory. You're talking to John Burroughs, you're trying to read articles. You get to this place called chief medical officer, and the tsunami comes, and you're no longer the chief medical officer at that institution. So, although you knew that something could happen, did you have a ready-made plan, or how did you begin to approach that sudden shift with the earth underneath you?
well, I think the way that the turnover took place, it was almost like every month somebody's head got chopped off, you know, in that leadership type position. And so I saw my boss, exit the organization. That it got real when that happened. 'Cause he'd been my mentor for a long time, and, back when I took on the role of medical director, Danny wasn't there yet, and it was Chris, and he really took me under his wing and helped train me and gave me books to read, all sorts of leadership books, etcetera, and was kind of my mentor and coach. And then suddenly he's gone, and I'm like, well, I was kind of before always a little bit looking, like once I did my master's program, I was curious and I'd reach out and I'd look at different opportunities. But then suddenly I was like, okay, I need to get serious about this. And, talk to my wife about it. And she felt the same. And then a few months later, it was my turn. And, but it was all in between. Every single month, there was somebody else. Um, and it was just, the writing was on the wall. There was going to be a big changing of the guard, and it happened.
Yeah, yeah, and I've been through the change of the guard and a different approach, but that's a different story for a different day. But so there are people listening to this who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years into their, physician executive role, who may or may not see it coming. There may be a sale, a merger, shutdown. Certainly, rural hospitals are really looking at, how to stay afloat, if you will. Any advice you would like to give to any young listener or someone growing in the role, how to manage this event?
I think more important than anything else is staying true to your values. So when things like this happen, a lot of people get very quiet, and they end up trying not to stick out or rock the boat, so to speak. But the reality is, there's things that need to be said. There's conversations that need to be had, and that's your job to do, especially as a physician champion and a patient champion, really more than anything else. Um, and being quiet wouldn't have saved me anyway. And I would just look back and say, why did you become a weenie suddenly? Like what? You sold out because you thought it would save your job. But the reality is, um, I think you stay true to the values that you have created, that you find critical and important. And I really love some of the podcasts where you spoke specifically about the leadership training and how they focus on what are your core values, what's your true north. Um, and that's one piece that I don't feel like I did the best job in creating the clinician leadership programs, is focusing on that before everything else. And I've seen individuals um, change in a way that was in alignment with them continuing their progress upwards, and giving up their values in order to climb the ladder. And that doesn't get us anywhere, and it doesn't get you anywhere in the long term. It might give you somewhere in the short term, and you may be able to get a cushy role or a role that you wanted. But the reality is, people won't trust you and they won't follow you. They follow people who are sincere, who are true, who are consistent, and who do the right thing even when it costs you. And that's the key, I think, especially as a clinician, physician leader. Do the right thing no matter what, for the patient, for the community, and everything is. That's what matters more than anything else, and everything else will work out. You can if they don't want you there because you're doing the right thing, then you shouldn't be there. You should go somewhere else. And so, um, I think that's my big take on it is that we all need to make sure we know what our true north is, and then we stick to that true north no matter what.
Great words of wisdom. And for our listeners, you may have heard some of our other shows about the conflict between the oath that we take as a physician and the obligations of our roles. And some of our guests have been in positions where they take an oath to something called the Constitution of the United States, and whether or not they're in conflict with that. And when we work in a health system, we have obligations to the system, but at the end of the day, our obligation and our original oath is to the patient. And I think you're articulating something that we might explore on another show. This true north, the values that we hold personally, and the swearing in of becoming a physician has to be part and parcel of what we do. And maybe that's why the Mayo Clinics and the Cleveland Clinics and physician run organizations tend to draw folks like you and me into them when we think about where we would go or where we would recommend folks to go when they need their care. There's something about that authenticity, that consistency, that credibility that you're referring to that creates the trust. And we live in a very disruptive time, and medicine is still a very, very good profession. Trust has eroded, and yet it is still one of the most trustworthy professions, and we need to continue to march in that direction. I really appreciate those insights relative to this. Well, we're getting towards the end of the show, although we may have to have a follow up show and get into these themes a little bit more. Anything else you want to share with the listeners about leadership, leadership development, what you might want to see in the future relative to physician leadership?
Well, for us to come up with a book list. I'm big on reading, and I think there's so many great books out there that don't necessarily pertain specifically to the chief medical officer, but they pertain to leadership. And if we as physician leaders can really master those skills, then it will make us that much more effective. I mean, I got favorite books on finance. I got favorite books on quality and safety. Crucial Conversations, of course, is a great book. But like, I think kind of having a canon, so to speak, of saying, "Hey, these are the skills that you need in order to be successful in these roles, medical director or otherwise." You should start reading these books and having conversations about them because when you have um, a shared language among chief medical officers, among physician leaders, it really helps us to be able to have a reference point that we all can understand and work on together. Because the reality is, I've read Crucial Conversations 3 times now, and I get something new out of it every time. You know,
Mhm.
I've read Drive by Daniel Pink. 2 or 3 times now as well, just to try to figure out how can I motivate the physicians in this group potentially to focus on joint alignment of what the patients need, right? Because you have the healthcare system, and sometimes you have these incentive metrics that are really misaligned and it don't really drive quality. So how do you realign those things? So always thinking in those ways. I've been, I think, accused, and not wrongly so, of parroting a lot of books. But for me, I don't take credit for things that I don't do myself. I don't feel like that's right. If people keep saying I parrot books and I talk about books, then I'm okay with that because it's just it. I feel like it's important for me to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, well, it says a lot about your character, and it's why we put you on the show. Folks like you belong on the show. So let's do another thing. Let's get your list on the website. All right. So we can call it Caesar's list, the parrot list. You define what you want. Let's get it on the so that people can read these books. And listen, you talked a few minutes ago about leadership, and it is ill defined in our undergraduate medical education. We barely get a taste of it in our GME. And slowly we begin to absorb what it is. The best definition I've ever had, and I'm not the first person to swear on this show. Jerome Adams, the U.S. Surgeon General, put the first word on this podcast. So I have now permitted to do this. Leadership, the best definition I've ever heard: who you are and how you get shit done. And the books that you're describing is the how that we need to, as physicians, learn that language, animate that language and put it into practice. And like you, I've got books on my shelf behind me that I have read multiple times, trying to reinforce and re-educate myself about the process or the idea that I'm trying to convey to people. So you're spot on. Will you give me that list one day?
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to put it on. All right. Well, thank you for being on the show. Amazing. We are kindred spirits, and you brought a lot of value to our listeners. You have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. If you want access to the hottest items on physician leadership and how to become a CMO, as I've mentioned, the website, thefirechiefcmo.com. Sign up with us, leave your comments about the show. Tell me what the next hot mess in healthcare is about and what physician leaders should be doing about it. And if you have a book, we'll put it on the list. Caesar's going to start it, and we'll put it out there on the website. I love talking with physician leaders and chief medical officers from all over the United States. Please connect, leave your reviews, leave your comments, and share this with your colleagues. And in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.